All right. I hope everyone is enjoying lunch. As I mentioned, to make sure that you're not here till 6, we're going to go ahead and have a working lunch. We will have a short break after this session. We'll put that in there to make sure you have a chance to take care of your stuff and talk again as well. I hope you're all right talking about nuclear power and radiation while you're eating, right? That doesn't bother you at all. But as many of you know, Missouri has been, nuclear power has been a cornerstone of Missouri's reliability and affordability of our grid and what we are able to provide through Callaway. When the SMR efforts first began years ago, Missouri worked hard to try and put together a bid and an effort to participate in that. That interest has not waned in the industry and in a variety of different sectors, but there has been a lot of headway since then. Some good, some bad, but ultimately moving forward with a lot of good. And so today's session is really to give you an update from the industry, from the regulatory side, the technological side, and what that can mean for economic development. And I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, so I'm not going to say anything else. But if you don't address it, I'll have a lot of questions. So with that, I'm happy to have Alex from the Public Service Commission come up and kick off the session on the potential nuclear energy here in Missouri and the Midwest, and what that means for you and economic development. Alex?
Thank you, Josh. Again, my name is Alex Hentel. I am a policy advisor and legal counsel to the chairman of the Missouri Public Service Commission, Scott Roop. Appreciate being given the opportunity to speak today. All right.
Arrow down or
Okay. Not just me.
Not just you. Now it's working.
Okay. Thank you, Josh. So as I said, I work at the Missouri Public Service Commission, but I do have to give a disclaimer. The views expressed during this presentation are my views alone and not the views of the Missouri Public Service Commission. But with that said, I do believe that the chairman would agree with most, if not all, of my comments here today. I wanted to start with a little bit of historical background of nuclear in Missouri. As most of you may know, we have one nuclear energy plant here in Missouri, the Callaway Energy Center, owned by Ameren, Missouri. That plant was certificated by the Missouri Public Service Commission in 1975. Under the original proposal, it was going to be a 2-unit energy center, with the first unit going into operation in 1981 and the second in 1983. The original cost projections were approximately $1.6 billion. Callaway was controversial from the beginning, as initially or immediately after the plant was certificated, Union Electric filed a rate case, and in that rate case, it asked the commission to include a line item for construction work in progress, or CWIP. I believe, that was in the tens of millions of dollars. The commission had not had a long track record of including CWIP in utility rates, and those instances where it was a very small amount and not in the magnitude of tens of millions of dollars. So Missouri voters, the year after the plant was certificated, approved by initiative petition a anti-CWIP law, which prohibited utility companies from including construction work in progress in electricity rates. Essentially, what has to happen now is if a utility wants to build generation, they have to finance the construction of that. It cannot start recovering the cost of construction until that generation is, as we say, in use and useful. So operating, providing a benefit to customers. So that made things a little bit challenging. And then 3 years later, we had the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania, which was changed public opinion to the negative around nuclear energy significantly. And also the NCR, our Nuclear Regulatory Commission, started to increase the safety precautions that had to be built into nuclear plants, significantly increasing the cost of construction and the time to construct. Eventually, Union Electric decided to cancel Unit 2 in 1981, noting the significant increase in financing, as well as lower demand than what they had been projecting going into the future. Unit 1 was fully operational in 1984, and there was a total cost of Unit 1 of approximately $3 billion. So, as you can see, several years behind schedule and significantly over the initial budget. This is a bit of a side, but I think it's relevant, particularly to this event. So 10 years ago, I was a new attorney, had just started working in utility regulation. And one of the first events that I attended was this MEPS conference in St. Louis. And the keynote speaker 10 years ago was one of the documentary filmmakers from this film, Pandora's Promise. And if you're not familiar with the documentary, it goes into the history of the nuclear energy industry here in the United States. Then also talks about how, in the opinion of the filmmakers, which included several environmentalists, that nuclear energy has to be part of the climate crisis if we want to reduce greenhouse gases significantly. A controversial film about a controversial topic, but I left that event skeptically optimistic and intrigued. And when I got home, I watched the full documentary, and I thought to myself, this is really going to define my career. That this really, I thought that there was a lot of promise in what they were talking about, and that we were on the verge of a nuclear renaissance in this country. Now, having the advantage of hindsight, in that past decade, I believe we've had 2 nuclear units in this country come online, one in 2016, and the other one just became operational earlier this year, with a third coming on sometime next year as well. Not quite the renaissance that I thought we were on the verge of, to say the least. Speaking of recent nuclear projects, I wanted to highlight a couple. The one that came on earlier this year, and I guess its counterpart that'll come on early in 2014, is the Vogtle Unit 3. It's built by Georgia Power. It came online. It was supposed to come online in 2016. It was 7 years behind schedule, and the current cost is $35 billion, which more than doubled the original estimates of that construction plan. The other one that I wanted to briefly highlight was the V.C. Summer Nuclear Station. In 2017, the South Carolina utilities that had embarked on building that abandoned the project after spending $9 billion. One of the utilities, SCANA, and the engineering contractor both declared bankruptcy. And two of the utility executives were convicted of fraud for lying to the state commission about the progress of construction of that unit. So thinking about recent examples and what happened around Callaway, the nuclear energy just keeps on shooting themselves in the foot, in my opinion. There's a lot of promise there to combat climate change, but it seems every time they are significantly over budget and way behind construction deadlines. And it's something that has to be addressed if it's going to play a part in our energy future. I wanted to touch on a few recent studies that have been conducted. The first one was conducted by the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, or NARUC. And I would note that my two co-presenters today were contributors to this report. Some of the highlights, I should mention IRPs, that stands for Integrated Resource Plans. So all of our utilities do integrated resource planning. In Missouri, our utilities do them every 3 years. And the time scale varies state to state, but in Missouri, we have a 20-year outlook, and the utilities have to project and come up with a plan of how they're going to meet anticipated need for generation over that 20-year horizon. Some of the highlights of this report, they found that utilities are always expressing a willingness to monitor the development of advanced nuclear technologies, but there's a lot of uncertainty about the technology and the financial risks around them. So naturally, they are left out of a lot of utilities' proposed plans to meet customer demand. There were 5 utilities that the study found that had explicitly included advanced nuclear technology in their IRPs, but with some exceptions, most of those utilities were in the footprint of a national lab that had a specific focus on nuclear energy. Most of the utilities that do have nuclear energy in their portfolio strongly support keeping nuclear resources online to maintain reliable energy and progress toward decarbonization goals. Utilities often cite the employment, the economic contributions, and reliability, and as I said, meeting those decarbonization goals as reasons to keep those plants online. Another study that I found really fascinating, this one is from US Department of Energy. It came out about 1.5 years ago, and it specifically looked at the possibility of converting both recently retired and current coal plants to nuclear plants. As we all know, there's been a lot of coal plants that have closed or announced closures in the recent years. And there's a lot of existing infrastructure, both transmission, access to water, skilled labor force, that won't be utilized or will be underutilized if that land is not repurposed for another energy use, production use. So some of the highlights of that study, it found that there are, among the sites that have closed recently, there are 35 sites that would be good candidates for a light water reactor, and 125 sites that could host an advanced nuclear reactor. And then again, amongst the candidate sites that are still operational, they found an additional 35 sites that would be good hosts for light water reactors, and another 190 that would be good candidates for an advanced reactor. The study said that the deciding factor between these two candidate types of nuclear energy is the population density. That for light water reactors, the surrounding area need, they have different. NRC has very strict guidelines on like the population density that you can build a light water reactor around. But, and this is something that I think is really important to highlight, is the potential capital cost savings of reutilizing a recently retired or soon to be retired coal plants. They found that there could be savings of 15 to 35% in overnight capital costs of reutilizing these existing sites. And when you're talking about budgets and billions of dollars that historically always go over budget, saving 15 to 35% is not something not to snicker at.
Alex,
Yes.
what's the difference between an advanced reactor and a low water reactor?
I'm going to let Mark and Billy
Okay.
tell you about the difference between a light water reactor and advanced reactors. But thank you for the question. So they also mentioned in the study the job growth potential. They cited that per project, there could be an increase of over 650 new jobs, and that would lead to $270 million in new economic activity for the community, as well as a greenhouse gas emissions reduction in the community of 86%. So 5 key takeaways. Policymakers should work with stakeholders to remove barriers to future nuclear developments. As I said earlier, Missouri has a CWIP, anti-CWIP statutes. I know that there's been some efforts in recent legislative sessions to modify or repeal that. And from what I've been told from our utility stakeholders, it is a significant barrier in the states to new nuclear developments. But that being said, policymakers need to ensure that ratepayers are protected from significant cost overruns, as we've seen are all too common in this industry. Second, utilities should be realistic about the cost and time necessary to construct conventional and advanced nuclear projects. I think we'd all agree that it's better to underpromise and overperform than it is to overpromise and underperform. And that's a lesson that I think the nuclear industry needs to take to heart. If my general contractor gives me a bid for redoing my bathroom or my kitchen, and it takes twice as long as they said it would, and he blows the budget, I'm not going to be happy, and I don't think anybody in this room would be happy either. I think it'd be really good if there was an independent review, maybe by USDOE, NARUC, or both, of some of the recent nuclear projects that have come online to see how those projects could have been managed better to lower cost and speed up the time frame from which they were built. One of the articles that I read about the recent Georgia power plants quoted a Georgia Power representative saying, "It's a shame that we're just stopping at 2 units." And I really think that there's some truth to that they've built this entire workforce to build this multi-year project. And after the second unit goes online, it's probably just going to sit idle. One of the other presenters talked about a boom and bust, job market. I think it'd be a waste to waste the talent that has been developed on those projects. But we have to find ways to make these projects cheaper and less time intensive. One historical example, going back to Callaway, there was actually supposed to be 5 copies of Callaway built. but only 2 of them got built. Callaway and Wolf Creek in Kansas are identical plants. The other 3 got canceled, again, because of the extreme costs of building these plants and sluggish demand that wasn't foreseen when they were first envisioned. Utilities should also consider both conventional and advanced nuclear projects in their IRPs to fulfill decarbonization goals and maintain reliability. Our other speakers are going to talk a lot about advanced nuclear. I think it's great. There's a lot of R&D being done to build smaller, cheaper reactors, but it's still a technology that's in development. And again, if you watch like Pandora's Promise, if we really want to solve the climate crisis, these nuclear plants need to be like online today. I read earlier this week, the Biden administration signed on to this, pledge at the COP28 climate conference in Dubai to triple nuclear generation worldwide by 2030.
That's what?
Yeah. Like I said, we've had like 2, maybe 3 nuclear plants come online in this country in that same amount of time. That's nowhere close to getting to tripling the amount of energy produced from this source. So there needs to be some serious examinations of both conventional and advanced nuclear technologies in IRP filings. And lastly, utilities should consider reusing existing energy infrastructure to lower the cost of developing these new nuclear projects and provide jobs to communities that need them. As we said, there's going to be a lot of wasted talent at when these coal plants close, and it'd be a shame to let that talent pool dry up. And lastly, my shameless plug. Some of you may be aware that my boss, Scott Roop, recently published a book called I Quit, Winning the War for Top Talent. What does this have to do with nuclear energy? Probably very little, if anything. But it has a lot to do with economic development. As we've heard multiple speakers talk here today about the challenges of recruiting and retaining talent, we all need to sharpen our pencils and figure out how do we tap into talent and what motivates the people who we want to recruit. So I would just throw out a suggestion that you may check out my boss's book. He dives into the culture and psychology of the workforce and the collective trauma that we all went through during COVID and how that impacts people's relationship with work today and going forward into the future. So I appreciate everybody's attention. Thank you. And I'll pass it off to Billy.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. I am Billy Valderrama. I'm a senior advisor in the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy, and appreciate Alex's great insight into the Missouri energy landscape and history on nuclear energy development. I am going to start off talking about what the Department of Energy is doing to advance nuclear energy, both sustaining the existing fleet as well as deploying advanced reactors. So why is nuclear energy important in our office in the Department of Energy and at the federal government level? Right now, nuclear energy, there are about 93 reactors in the US, about 100 gigawatts per se of electricity produced by them, and they account for 47% of the emissions-free electricity in the United States. If we want to reach the very ambitious 2035 targets and 2050 targets, we need to ensure nuclear energy is part of that mix, either both continue operation of the existing fleet, but also deploying advanced reactors, which range from micro reactors, single megawatt, small modular reactors, 20 to a couple 200, 300 megawatts, all the way to large light water reactors of around a gigawatt in scale. All these will be needed to meet these very challenging energy needs that we are facing. To help reach that future, what DOE is doing and the Office of Nuclear Energy is our main mission is to advance nuclear energy science and technology to meet the U.S. energy, environmental, and economic needs through 4 main priorities: keeping the existing fleet of nuclear reactors operating, deploying new reactors, secure and sustaining our nuclear fuel cycle, and as well expand our international nuclear energy cooperation. Because not only does the United States will need a greater amount of, will have a higher energy demand in the future, but so will our international partners and allies. Our first priority is keeping the existing fleets operating. So at DOE, we support a variety of research and development programs, such as the light water reactor sustainability programs that have provided support to keeping the existing fleet that has supported their license extensions. Originally, they're all licensed by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission for 40 years. A majority of them have reached that or will be reaching that life cycle, that 40-year time frame. We've supported R&D to help inform that technically and scientifically they can operate for another 20 years. So many of them have applied for an additional 20-year license extension going to 60 years. Now they are looking at going from 60 years to 80 years, a subsequent license renewal, and many utilities are following that suit. And so we've supported some of the R&D to ensure that the materials within these reactors can meet that additional time of service. We've also supported integrated energy systems research and hydrogen production demonstrations for the existing fleet. In particular, for about the past 10 years or so, many of the reactors that have closed have been for economic reasons. They're just not, they have not been profitable, not so much for technical reasons. So to ensure their continued operation, given they're so important to meet our climate objectives, we've been working on ways to diversify their economic sources, revenues. And one of them we've been looking at has been hydrogen production. And we've at the Department of Energy have supported 3 different hydrogen demonstration projects. The first one being the 9 Mile Point plant in New York State, and earlier this year was able to demonstrate low power electrolysis hydrogen production using nuclear energy, and that's helping meet the hydrogen needs of the plant itself. We're also supporting 2 additional demonstrations, one at the Davis-Besse plant in Ohio and another at Prairie Island in Minnesota for next year, but one being a low temperature electrolysis, one being a high temperature electrolysis method of hydrogen production. Kind of as Alex was speaking, right now we have conventional large light water reactors is what we see and will be primarily used around the world. They're 500 megawatts to over 1,000 megawatts in size, and they primarily produce base load, clean, firm electricity to the grid. The future, we believe they will continue to play a role, but so will advanced reactors. And as I mentioned, advanced reactors in the Department of Energy's view, and I think industry would agree, ranges all the way from microreactors to the current state of large light water reactors like the Vogtle unit that just came into operation earlier this year. They have the potential to be more flexible in energy generation, so help with that evolving electricity mix of the future that will include more renewables, but also many of these advanced reactors, in particular the Generation 4 reactors, not only will produce electricity, but also operate at higher temperatures than the current reactors. So they have a lot of they can produce a lot of high quality heat that can be used for industrial applications, to power hydrogen production, and as well for manufacturing of chemicals. And at the department, along kind of with what Alex was saying, kind of figuring out what the potential demand can be and kind of what it would take to get there, the Loan Programs Office and the Office of Technology Transitions put out earlier this year the Pathways to Commercial Liftoff report on 5 emerging technology areas, and advanced nuclear being one of them, as to what is the value proposition for these technologies. And it covers a range of reactor technologies and does make the case that clean, firm electricity will be needed in the future, even if we have a significant renewable build out. And how large would that need be? We potentially may need up to 100 to 200 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2050. That's if we keep the existing fleet of about 100 gigawatts or so in operation. That's a significant and challenging risk, and not risk, efforts, and it's going to require a significant amount of build out. And these are if all the very high assumptions of large renewable builds are accomplished. So we're going to need everything to meet these very challenging goals. And as Alex said, to reach these, what is going to be important is that these demonstrations that right now the department is working on, and these first movers are built as close to on time and on budget, because without being on time and on budget, they'll look at other energy sources, because it comes down to being something affordable that these communities, states, utilities are able to afford. At DOE, I won't go into all the technologies. I'll let Mark talk about them a bit more, but want to focus on one of our main programs in support of advanced reactors, and it's the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. It includes 3 different areas of focus. First being supporting the commercial demonstrations of 2 advanced reactors by the end of the decade, and those are the Natrium reactor in Kemmerer, Wyoming. This is at a retiring coal plant. And the other is a XE100 high temperature gas reactor in Seadrift, Texas. And this is at a Dow chemical facility. And I highlight those 2 because as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the federal government's 50% cost share of these projects was provided. So it's $2.5 billion in federal funding to support these demonstrations by the end of the decade. The department is also supporting a variety of technologies and technology sizes of reactor technologies that would come afterwards. So later in the 2030s or mid 2030s, that would be ready for commercialization and demonstration. I was going to mention the energy transformation report that Idaho National Lab put out last year, but Alex spoke about it already. Just wanted to note that the group that put this report together is working on a follow-up report that would look into and help identify communities, what questions they may need to ask, what they would need to look at should they consider or look at a different energy source for their retiring coal plant facility, and as well as utilities, kind of what questions they should be asking of the community. So looking as a follow-up to this report, and that would be hopefully released sometime early next year. Our third priority in the Office of Nuclear Energy is a secure and sustain the nuclear fuel cycle. That's all the way from the front end, so fresh fuel for the reactors, all the way to the back end, to the fuel after it's been irradiated and used to produce electricity for local communities. In terms of the front end, a lot of it can be summarized as to the overall uranium strategy the department has been working on. And a lot of this changed after February of last year when Russia invaded Ukraine, because right now our existing fleet receives around 20% of the enriched uranium enrichment services from Russia, and they currently do. Not the uranium itself, that's mostly, I think last year the largest supplier was Canada, but the part that makes it of a higher fissile isotope is done in Russia. And the advanced reactors are going to utilize a different fuel form called high assay low enriched uranium. It's one that has more of that, a higher concentration of that fissile isotope. And the plan was the first reactors would obtain it from Russia. That's no longer an option. So we've been working on with our congressional partners on finding funding to help kickstart that domestic capability and work with our allies, because we're not the only ones facing this situation, but also our partners in Eastern Central Europe. With Congress support and through the Inflation Reduction Act, we were provided $700 million for high assay low enriched uranium. However, that is a very good start, but we are going to need further funding, and in particular, if we want to support domestic capacity deployment in the United States for low enriched uranium. And we're working actively with Congress to fund that effort as we speak. Towards the back end, which is another critical aspect, because a lot of times when we talk about new nuclear, both here in the United States and abroad, they talk, what about the waste? What do we do with the waste? Right now, we're working and revamping our overall integrated waste management strategy. Earlier or a few months ago, we announced a consortia that is looking at a consent-based siting consortia that are of communities, individual entities that might be interested in learning more about siting a federal consolidated interim storage. So right now, most of the fuel is located at nuclear power plants that are currently not operating or that have been decommissioned. They're stored safely, but the federal government has a responsibility to take on that fuel. So we are working in that process to first bring them to an interim storage facility until a geologic repository would be built in the future. We're supporting the development of the high-tech rail cars that would take that fuel from the sites where they are currently to an interim storage facility and to a final repository in the future. And our last priority is the international nuclear energy cooperation, expand that. As Alex mentioned, there was an announcement made earlier this week at COP to triple our nuclear energy capacity by over 20 countries, which included the United States. That's export potential of around $1.9 trillion. And so those are jobs here in the United States that would help if those technologies are of US origin, jobs, manufacturing here in the US, but also engineering services, a variety of labor type jobs supporting those builds overseas. And then the final two slides, it's kind of what can state policymakers do and how does the Office of Nuclear Energy engage with state lawmakers. And one of the main areas is what I'm doing today, kind of helping provide a understanding or technical information on the advancements of these nuclear energy technologies, as well as help connect states with industries, with the national labs to provide technical assistance as they look into their energy planning. One of the main vehicles is the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, or GAIN, effort, and as well to help maximize our resources, we work with a variety of national groups at the state level, in particular the National Conference of State Legislators, NARUC, as Alex mentioned, and with NARUC have partnered with the National Association of State Energy Officials, to put together a group of around 28 states that are interested in looking at advanced nuclear, both either they've committed or just interested in learning more. But the interest is there by a variety of states at looking at nuclear energy for a variety of reasons, either energy needs, for economic developments of their states, or for as a workforce efforts. We also work with the National Governors Association, the Energy Communities Alliance. That's a special group of former DOE environmental cleanup sites or cleanup communities that are formed together to kind of help revitalize these communities into new projects, and as well through the interagency working group on coal and power plant communities and economic revitalization. And with that, yes.
Quick question, how feasible and how much involved is United States on the nuclear fusion project in Europe?
We are,
That is something that we approached.
oh,
Solve all our problems, right? If it's
yeah, fusion has a great potential. We're very involved, and the United States is part of the ITER effort demonstration, and as well our private industry is looking at deploying fusion. Yes.
Alex had shared that the last two nuclear plants that came into operation were both over budget and
Yes.
over time. Have any other nations deployed nuclear reactors in the last 10 years that have been within budget and on time? Has somebody figured out how to do it properly?
Yes, there are lessons learned that, and UAE has four builds. These are Korean design reactors that have come in as close to on time, on budget, but also, how can I say this? UAE for a variety of reasons, they were able to come as close to on time, on budget in terms of building, but then on the capacity building of building the regulatory infrastructure, it has taken them a while to enter operation. Another example is the AP1000. Those are the reactors built in Georgia. They were first built in China. A few reactors, even those, there were lessons learned that Westinghouse used to help lessen the overall, how can I say this? Sorry, to reduce those time delays that were put in force for Vogtle. So if you look at Vogtle unit, the unit that entered operation, and even just the one that's very close to entering operation, there were a lot of lessons learned just between those two units, and the cost difference between those units and the time that it overall took to get them operating there's a lot of lessons learned. And now Westinghouse, which is the designer of those reactors, has learned those additional lessons from the Georgia builds to support 4 new builds they're doing in China. And they are expected to come in on as close to on budget and on time of around 5-year constructions for those 4 units. So there are lessons learned, but that is the important thing. Important, hard, challenging factors that need to be taken into account and learn, especially your design, be as close to finalized before you start construction. And it's not, the United States isn't the only one that had that issue. France has had that issue with their recent builds of around the same time. I think they had one reactor in Finland that just entered operation. I think that single reactor might have cost more than the 2 Vogtle units, or pretty close, a glue. And they're still finalizing the other reactor in France that have had similar challenges. But there are lessons to learn from us, from other countries that did not have that issue, but it's applying those lessons at the end. Yes.
Why is nuclear construction endemically over cost and over time? thing. And I guess a kind of an adjacent question. Are some of these new technologies creating smaller reactors? Because it seems like part of the issue of not being economically viable is that you're too big for the market. If you had smaller reactors, they would be much more nimble and able to fit in with a mix of energy sources and types.
No, yes, for your first question on why did it seem like there's been this issue with nuclear? I think we, through the 70s, or when it was a big ramp up of nuclear energy projects in the United States, I think we were able to be as close to on schedule and had a significant build out. We had a full workforce that was fully trained and developed to build these reactors. Then that stopped in the late 70s through early 80s, weaned down, had no real construction projects until the Vogtle units, essentially. So we lost all that capability we had and had to relearn all those construction muscles that took a long time to learn, and we paid a lot of hard lessons. In terms of the new technologies, yes, many of these reactors, particularly the small modular reactors, are meant to be all built within a factory, manufactured, and then some final assembly to be done at the site where it will be located. So instead of being large infrastructure projects as these current builds are, it will be more comparable to what like a natural gas plant is, that a few parts are brought in together, final assembled, and then put together. Yes.
Really quickly, but then you're saying basically those concepts are not going to be available on the market until mid-2030s?
No, the first reactors are, the first demonstrations are late in this decade, early 2030s. That will be the time frame. I was saying those, we're supporting the two demonstrations by the end of the decade, but there will be more technologies available by even the mid-2030s. So I think we'll have a bunch of additional ones by the mid-2030s.
To target a coal plant to be repurposed for nuclear, I guess what timeline would you say that you have a commercially available SMR to use?
I think being aggressive could be end of the decade, early 2030s, but I would say those conversations would need to be started now as to whether it makes sense or not, because that planning is very important. Whatever we're having conversations today will impact those decisions. So I think it's worth considering and learning as much about nuclear, the technologies, which ones are ready today. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Billy. Thanks, everyone. So we're going to try to get us caught up here a little bit. So I'm Mark Nickel from the Nuclear Energy Institute. We're the trade association for the nuclear energy industry. We represent our members who are owners, operators of nuclear power plants, companies that develop technology, supply chain companies in this space. So, yeah, okay, it was going in and out. I want to start a little bit with the types of advanced reactors. Most of these slides are geared toward economic aspects of nuclear energy. And to start with your question earlier about what the difference is in the technology. So a large light water reactor is the technology that's been in operation in the United States for decades. Large is the size, about 1,000 megawatts. Light water is the coolant or the material that's used to cool the reactor. So it's water, like regular water, although much cleaner. Light is referring to the type of hydrogen that is in the water. So it's a regular hydrogen atom, and so we could just call it water-cooled reactors. Light means it has one neutron. Heavy water has 2 neutrons. There's also hydrogen that has 3 neutrons. There are other designs in other countries that use heavy water-cooled reactors, but in the United States, it's only regular water that we use. So the other, and we do have smaller versions of these, we call them LWR SMRs, or light water reactors, small modular reactors. And small means about 300 megawatts in size or less. We also have a different size category, which is called micro reactors, and that's 1 to 10 megawatts in size. Now, for the other cooling technologies, we have high temperature gas, we have liquid metal, we have molten salt. These are all called non-water cooled reactors because it's just not water. Generally, out of all these technologies, we call them all advanced. Some will make a specific denomination of which ones might be advanced in their minds and others not. Some might call some small and others not, but we call them all advanced. And the reason we call them all advanced is because they share similar features in that they have improvements over the reactors in operation today in either economics, safety, performance, flexibility, fuel utilization, any of those areas. So advanced just means they have improvements. Now, within this, cost is one of the improvements. You had a question just a minute ago about the economics of large reactors versus small reactors. Now, the large reactors got larger and larger over time because we were benefiting from economies of size. And so it's counterintuitive to say, well, now you're making them smaller. Is that going to impact the cost? What we found is we are working against the economies of size. So, just that principle alone is going to make them more expensive on a per unit basis than a large reactor. But what we found is as we made them smaller, we could incorporate in inherent safety characteristics, basically natural forces, gravity, natural circulation, and nature always works. And so because you're relying on nature for safety, and it always works, then you can reduce some of the duplicative and backup systems that you needed for safety, just in case a man-made feature was going to fail, like an active pump or something that needs power. And so we call that economies of safety, or it comes about as you get them smaller, so economies of smallness. And so that's counteracting the losses in economies of size to help make the economics better. Generally, in my estimation, these are going to be similar on a cost per megawatt hour basis as a large reactor. So we're not expecting to see significant drops in per unit costs, but similar costs. Moving on to that next slide, when we look at the question of what does the generation mix look like in the future, and when utilities start to go plan this, and as think tanks start to do papers about it, they know that it not just has to be clean, it has to be reliable and affordable. And when you put those three things together, this is one study by Clean Energy, but almost all of them conclude that we need significantly more nuclear energy to achieve a clean, reliable, affordable electricity grid. Vibrant Clean Energy is one of the ones I like because they do an hour-by-hour matching of demand and supply and geographic matching within a very small squares. And so the study actually selects the generation technology that's best fit and locates it. What it finds is that the lowest cost system, this is US-wide, has a tremendous amount of more nuclear energy, and it'd be about 43% of the grid. Today, we're about 19% of the grid. Of course, by 2050, there's going to be more electricity usage. And wind and solar, along with some battery, is going to be the other half of the grid. Now, that study looked at it and said, well, that's a lot of nuclear energy. What if we're not able to build all of that? What if we have a constraint? The regulator can't process the applications fast enough, the supply chain can't keep up, the workforce isn't available. So they artificially constrained the deployment of new nuclear in that study, and to the point of 60 gigawatts. So it's about 13% of future generation. And the rest was picked up by wind and solar, again, with batteries as backup. Both are going to be clean, both are going to be reliable. The difference is in cost. The one that was not able to utilize the optimal mix of nuclear energy, at least for this study, was going to cost about $500 billion more that would be passed on to the ratepayers. So why is that? And the reason is because advanced reactors, nuclear energy brings a lot of benefits to the system that is not available altogether in other technology sources. Long-term price stability is certainly one of them. Nuclear energy, you're well aware of, is a high capital cost technology, but very low fuel and O&M costs. And they operate, as Billy said, they're licensed initially for 40 years. We're going to be operating almost most of the reactors out to 80 years. People are talking about being able to operate nuclear reactors for 100 years. So these are long-term assets, and so they have a long-term price stability. They're reliable, dispatchable, they're there when you need them, and they make efficient use of transmission because they're energy dense and high volumes of energy at a particular node. Going on to the last two, of course, I shouldn't skip over environmentally friendly, and they are. And in fact, nuclear energy is tied with wind as the lowest total carbon footprint of any energy technology. But the last two are specific to advanced technologies specifically, and that is better integration with renewables and storage because they're being designed up front for flexibility and hybrid energy systems. That means they can produce electricity as well as heat or hydrogen to help decarbonize the difficult to decarbonize industrial sectors. And the last one, black start capability and island mode, this comes from their safety profile. Because I talked about making them smaller, relying on natural phenomena for safety, they will, many of them will no longer need to have off-site power as a requirement to be able to demonstrate their safety. Today's reactors do. So in the event that the grid goes out, today's reactors have to shut down as a matter of safety because they don't have off-site power in case of an emergency to run the pumps and other things that's needed for safety. Because the advanced technologies, most of them will not need that, they can actually continue to run even when the grid goes out. They can be there to help start the grid back up. So they're going to be tremendous assets for the grid for those reasons. Now I want to come back to cost, and this is a recent report that looked at the levelized cost of electricity for different sources. And it tried to do it on an apples to apples basis, because most of the time when levelized cost of electricity numbers are put out, they don't all have the same characteristics. And mainly what I mean is reliability. And so this report put together, what would gas, nuclear, and renewables look like if they were all reliable and all clean. So natural gas needs carbon capture sequestration. Solar needs batteries for their backup. And what would those costs be? And so this is the comparison that they found. These numbers are before you add in federal and other government incentives for different technologies. Now I do believe that we should be looking at decisions for the generation additions on a system basis, not a simplistic levelized cost of electricity basis. But it goes to show that nuclear is competitive when you add in all of the value and benefits that are being brought to the grid. Looking a little bit more at specific economic benefits, this report looked at employment numbers for small modular reactors. This is based on a 600 megawatt plant, and if you think that 300 megawatts is an average size of an SMR, so it would be 2 units at this particular plant example, and has 300 permanent jobs for the 60 plus years of operations. I didn't have a reference here, but we can get you a link. There's a Scott Madden report, Gone to Steam, which talks about coal to nuclear job transitions. But what they found is that the number of SMR jobs are equivalent on the same plant size as the number of jobs that would have been at that coal plant before that. And those positions from the coal plant, those workers can be transitioned into a nuclear plant, many of the same types of skills and positions, and where it's needed, they can easily be upskilled into a nuclear power plant. The economic activity, these numbers in that report, they were actually scaled from today's current large reactors. And so there's no magic formula in those, but it is a scaling based on the power output. And the conclusion is that nuclear power plants are economic engines, in not just in terms of the tax base, but also in terms of the knock-on economic benefits in the local communities. Now, I want to talk about the federal support for nuclear energy, and the federal government has long been supportive of nuclear energy. Their infrastructure bill has the funding for the demonstration projects that Billy talked about. The IRA has tax credits for nuclear, just like the same tax credits for other clean energy technologies. Now, this is where I want to talk a little bit about project execution and cost accuracy. And so a couple of the questions were out there in terms of, well, why does nuclear energy not build on time, on budget as much as they need to be? In the United States, there actually are a few examples of being built on time, on budget, but the large majority have not been. When you look internationally, the Japanese and Koreans almost always build on time, on budget. There's two components, in my view, that contribute to it. One is a technology component, or can be solved by technology. The other is just project management, and that's independent of nuclear. That's true for any large mega project. So when we look at first the technology side, we know that what causes the most delays and cost overruns in nuclear energy comes from field work. Civil work, it's the concrete work that's on site. And so the small modular reactors are looking at moving more of the work out of the field and into factories, put it in parallel processes. You have better quality control over it. What would happen on site is more assembly rather than stick build. So think about your homes, right? Back in the day, we used to stick build our homes, and now most of them come in modular parts. And you just assemble them on site, and it goes much faster, and it's much cheaper to build that way. So that's the same concept here. The second is in the project management aspects of it, and these are as I mentioned before, it's true for any mega project. What NEI has done, we've worked with and looked out at all of the nuclear projects in the United States and some internationally, actually some experience from other industries, and collected what are all the lessons learned and best practices from building these projects. And we've documented them, made them available to our members. One of the key conclusions we found is that most people know what these best practices are, like complete your design before you begin construction. Alex, in your example, if your contractor began your kitchen renovation without having drawn it out and bought all the materials, he's destined he or she is destined to be over time, over budget, right? So complete the design is one of them. But what we found is that people knew what they were, but they didn't do them. And so there's a couple of reasons. Sometimes there's external incentives that cause you to not be able to do them. But more often than not, it's just a lack of understanding of exactly how do I go to do it, because that's not really been documented. So we're going out and developing what we call implementation guidance so that they understand, what does it mean that I've completed my design and I'm ready to go begin construction? How do I know that I have a cost and schedule estimate that is accurate enough to be in construction? So we're working through that to try to reduce the risk. Nonetheless, the risk is there and the perception of risk is there. And so in order for companies to move forward, we're going to need some risk sharing, and we're in conversations with the federal government to try to see if they can help share some of that risk for the early projects. Because, quite frankly, if you do the same project over and over again, you get good at it, the risk of overruns is really low, which is really one of the reasons why we had cost overruns in the US in the 70s and 80s. Everything was a first of a kind. Nobody used the same design. Wolf Creek and Callaway were the only ones that really used the same design. And we are going to be doing that for the advanced reactors. But to get the first ones going, there's a lot of uncertainty. Did you estimate everything right? Did you know how to do everything? Everybody in your supply chain, they may not have done this before. So whenever it's first of a kind, you always have a higher risk. And so we're looking for federal support for that. We also see strong support in the states, especially in these last 2 years. Lots of legislation introduced and passed. They fall into 3 buckets. One is remove barriers. There have been some states that have moratorium against nuclear construction. West Virginia, Montana, there's several others that have repealed them. Illinois, right next door, repealed theirs just recently. Many other states are pursuing studies and commissions to look into new nuclear. New Hampshire, Kentucky, and 1 or 2 others just released their reports. And then finally, there's incentives. Now, it could be construction work in progress, or it could be other things like tax incentives, or it could be mechanisms that help to make the market structure a little bit more conducive to first of a kind technologies, or reliability portfolio standards as well, if that's a concern in the state. So all of this work is leading to a lot of projects in the US and Canada. These dots represent, I think it's about 20 projects in the US. These are all going to be, are expected or planned for deployment by 2030. They represent different things. Some are grid deployments, some are industrial deployments, some are research. The one in Missouri is University of Missouri is looking at a second research reactor there, and the same dot for Illinois. That's a university application. So with that, happy to take questions.
I'd just like to point out that if we can get the cost down on nuclear, it's still going to be facing competitive cost reductions in the other industries. Bloomberg just came out with a report a couple of weeks ago saying that solar is going to drop to 11 cents a watt, down from the 30s. So, and then again, the solar technology is moving up from 350 to 550 watts per panel. So the balance of system costs for install is also going to go down. And then I was wondering if your economic analysis took into account the federal subsidies that are involved in both insurance and waste storage, when you have that in your costs of electricity.
Yeah, so I know for the nuclear costs, we include all the costs. We include waste and decommissioning everything. I think the other technologies don't typically include those costs. So now in terms of, yes, the cost of all technologies are going to go down. So our technology costs are going to have to go down as well. And you do that by building more and innovating technology. I would say that what we do see is that as more and more intermittent resources are deployed onto the grid, then the costs of those tend to increase as well, because you're reducing reliability and need more backup. So you can't look, that's why I showed the one graph where we're showing reliable, clean costs across all technologies.
The batteries with the solar on top.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know in that study where you're comparing the amount of wind and solar you would need in the 2 scenarios, did they hold transmission lines and transmission capacity constant at kind of current ones, or did it also look at what if we build more transmission, maybe to unlock more of the wind resource and go cross regions?
I don't know. I'd have to go look and see. Yeah.
So really quick, just sort of like siting conditions of where these, where will these advanced reactors be? Is it, do you think it's, along just the constraints of siting these things that you're not on? Is it transportation of fuel? Is it transmission? Is it the population density? I guess, do these coal plants just kind of, are they so much better than any other kind of sites, previously? Or what do you sort of see for the siting criteria?
Yeah, great question on the siting. So for advanced reactors, the siting is going to be much, the number of available sites or suitable sites is going to be much more. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, if you look at the population effects, because right now large reactors have to be set off from the population based on the regulations. Well, the NRC is looking at more performance-based requirements for population. We've done estimates that many of these advanced reactors will be able to be located very close to population centers, and so now you're going to be able to replace coal plants that are in those locations. The other is that large reactors need a local body of water to be able to provide an ultimate heat sink for the plant. Many of the advanced reactors are being developed with air cooling capabilities, so you wouldn't need that local body of water. So that opens up the number of sites as well. Seismic is probably the most limiting, and so where you might have fault lines or high seismic zones, but then again, we're looking into technologies called seismic isolators that will be able to help to insulate you from that and be able to open up even more sites. So yeah, the siting will be much easier. In terms of whether a coal site is better than any other site, it has advantages, certainly. It's got the infrastructure there. It has workers that have operated the plant, so they're easy to transfer their skills. For the particular coal site, we'd be worried about any of the legacy environmental hazards that it leaves behind, and so sometimes we might actually look at being adjacent to the site rather than exactly on top of the site. Yes.
Do we know if our European allies are going to be amenable to restarting the plants that they've been shutting down?
So for restart, I don't know. I haven't heard much of the conversation about restart, but for new plants, yes. The Europeans are pursuing nuclear energy quite aggressively. They're looking not just advanced nuclear, they are looking at that, but more urgently, they're looking at large plants.
What's their basic technology? I don't think it's like water reactors.
Yeah, it's water-cooled technology.
Okay.
And yeah, there's some US technology over there, some French technology. As you get into Eastern Europe, there's more Russian technology. But many of the countries that are looking at pursuing nuclear energy in the near term are looking at US technologies, the AP1000 or other advanced reactors.
Thank you so much, Mark. Are there any other questions for the other presenters? All right, please join me in thanking them. There was an online question. What is the cost to build a 300 megawatt SMR? Have there been any deployed in the US, and what are the timeframes for regulatory approval?
Yeah, so none have been deployed yet. The first ones are expected to come online 2029, 2030. The project that is most in the lead would actually be in Ontario by Ontario Power Generation, and they're looking at 2029. They're breaking ground now on their project. In terms of a cost, you could look at cost in three different ways. You could look at it as what's the cost at a megawatt hour basis. I guess the only public number I know of is from the UAM's project that was recently discontinued, and that was an $89 a megawatt hour prices that what they were looking at. The other way is overnight capital cost. That's $1 per kilowatt electric basis, and estimates are ranging in around the $6,000 to $10,000 range for the first of a kind. As we come down the learning curve, all those will go down. So to put that in perspective in a total dollar, which is the third way to look at it, for a 300 megawatt plant, you're looking at, I think it's, maybe $1 to $3 billion, depending on the particular technology and whether it's first of kind or not.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. So our next panel, then we have a break. I apologize. So we will go ahead and move on. If you need to get up, that's fine. But our next panel, that's not good. Actually, we didn't work.